Kauai, we have, I think it's on a whole lot, but I'm not sure. We have a chapter on Kauai, and most recently on Maui. Huio, I know, was, we resurrected these chapters to carry on the struggle that our kupuna carried on vehemently to protest annexation. So we're just kind of getting current as to what the hot topics are today, what's of concern, what can we do, that sort of thing. So primarily Honolulu, what we do is we have these educational meetings. We haven't had one in a while because this building was undergoing renovation for the last 6 months. But we've done about 20 speeches, welcome to the public, to make them free, just to educate. Tonight we have the honor of having Dr. Ron Williams. Dr. Ron Williams speaks on many different topics, so many that I forgot what he's speaking of tonight because he's constantly evolving. So
this is not wrong.
Yeah, he's going to tell you what he's going to talk about, and we're going to have a chance to ask questions. So please, warm welcome for Dr. Ron Williams.
Aloha. Ron Williams Jr. He malahini wa kia pahi o poho kaina, loko ka aina o Honolulu, loko ka mohu o Kona, ka mohu puni o Oahu I kopawa I pai aina o Laila, e hoka wao I kuhu o Kuawa. I'm malahini to this place, I'm new to the land. Like this land, Oahu in general, and Hawaii in general. So I always like to start with who I am. My mo'o Kuawa, and I'll do this real short version because my battery's dying. So my mom is Janet Marie Labounty. She's French, Irish, a little bit of Czechoslovakian. She comes from Chicago, where I was born. Her people come back from Montreal, before that Paris, Ireland, and so forth. My father is Ron Williams Sr., Big Ron. He comes from a long line of farmers, fishermen, and hunters in the southern part of the United States, Arkansas in particular, which is where I grew up, hunting, fishing. My dad lives in a trailer out in the woods to this day. So that's my dad. I came to Hawaii, my academic house started in 1984, 85, when I went to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. I was 17, turning 18, and I went out to college all excited about doing something fun, and I took 3 semesters of courses and about 16 classes, and I think I passed one of them. I did have a lot of fun, but I didn't do much school. And so I left BYU. It was agreed that I should leave. Came home, lived life, was in my 20s and 30s. Came out to Maui in 1997, New Year's Day 97. My girlfriend at the time was Hapai, was pregnant, and we wanted to raise a kid outside of San Francisco, which was where we were living. She had family on the island. She's Filipino, African American, Chinese, American Indian. So we had a daughter, Keely Makanamalie Williams, my love of my life, who's 21 as of last week. And I was working in a luau in Lahaina and kind of saw my daughter growing up and realized I couldn't do that forever. So I had to go back to school. I got really, really blessed, amazingly blessed to meet the right people and the right kumu. My first kumu was a Koniakani. He ran the Friends of Moku'ula in Lahaina. He was bringing back that sacred area of Moku'ula. He was a wonderful teacher, because, especially for me, because he was about really learning. I remember one of the lessons he gave me was, I'm kind of energetic and passionate, and sometimes that's good and sometimes not so much. And so I would, tell me more. And I remember he gave me 1 word a day when he was teaching me a little. He said, go learn this word. I said, I know the word. Go learn the word. Be with it, speak it, understand it, and so forth. And tomorrow I'll give you a new word. And it's not the way to learn. If you did that all the time, you'd end up knowing 100 words by the time you die, right? But he was making a point that knowledge is it's not just the accumulation of knowledge, it's the learning what's inside there. And then so I started to learn that. I went to Maui Community College, and my first kumu there was Kyopi Raymond, another wonderful kumu, very blessed to have him. He showed a film class one day of the most passionate, brilliant person I've ever seen in my life, and that was Dr. Hamani K. Trask. And I kind of naively said, that's who I want to study under. Came out to Hawaiian Studies, Kamaku'okulani in 2001. Scared to death, single dad. Almost becoming a single dad. And Hanani K took me under her wing. skinny Hawaii farmer boy from Arkansas. She, for some reason, took me under her wing. She called me her bullheaded Hawaii boy. And she got me through college. She didn't just teach me classes, she got me through college. Personal ways, professional ways, and so forth. And I graduated with my BA in Hawaii Studies. I went back to Maui to take care of my daughter. She called me up one day and said, "You're coming back to grad school." And I said, "Cool, I got 20 bucks to my name. I'm staying in a friend's front yard. No, I can't." She said, "Come back to Hawaii, you're going to grad school." So I flew over. She had me a tuition waiver for that semester from school. She had me, my daughter signed up at Pulikakuni Wanui and other things. So she did in many ways get me through college. I got my master's degree in Pacific Island Studies, which is kind of like Hawaii Studies, but a little broader. And I got my PhD in 2013 in Hawaiian history. It's a PhD I'm very proud of, not in the sense that I did it, but in the sense that it exists. The University of Hawaii, started in 1907, never had a Hawaiian history PhD. Didn't exist until about 8 years ago. You could get a PhD in Chinese history, Southeast Asian history, American history, European history, but you couldn't get a PhD in Hawaiian history. Folks who went through the program like John Historio and Lili Kalakamehiwa and those brilliant kanaka went through Pacific history and focused on Hawaii. But about 8 years ago, they hired 2 professors, Dr. Noelani Arista and Dr. John Rosa, and they started a PhD program in Hawaiian history. Yeah. So it's finally a little overdue. There's a specific PhD in Hawaiian history. So that's who I am. Tonight, I want to do a few things, and I hope we don't run too long. I'll try to move us along. But so when I can talk, and I'm ecstatic that we have a small crowd. It's a little more intimate. Yeah, we can talk story. Please think of questions, by the way, as I go through. But for any crowd, whether it's 1 person or 100 people, for me, if there's anyone in the crowd who we haven't talked to about historiography in Hawaii, we need to do that. What historiography is simple. It's the process of history. So this is a history book. It's history. The way the author came up with its history is his or her historiography process. Now, every book ever written is somewhat exclusive. You can't be completely inclusive. It's just physically impossible. If I'm writing a book on World War II, can I interview 70 million people in 100 countries? Of course not. So I choose who to interview and talk to, and who not to talk to, and so forth. And that becomes my historiography. Sometimes it's purposeful. Like, I don't want to talk to those folks, I know what they're going to say, and so forth. And that creates a certain book, right? Well, in Hawaii, historiography is our biggest problem. Because I haven't been around the world, and I've done history around the world, but I've read, one of my 4 areas of kind of PhD is world history. And I can tell you, I've never seen a place like Hawaii where the historiography has been so, not curse, messed up. And that's mostly because of language, the issue of language. The people we're talking about, in general, the vast majority of them spoke Moloholei. And we're talking about them through sources that are written about them in English. If you go into the library today, or you go into a museum or archives or bookstore, and you go look at the Hawaiian history books, for every 100 books there is, 95, 96, 97 of them come from English language sources only. And 2 or 3 come from Hawaiian sources. Now it's changing, but we're still in that situation. So what that means is, we've gotten a story about Hawaiians from others. Doesn't mean it's all lies, but it means it's a problem. It means we've seen a murder, there's 10 witnesses. I've gone up and asked one lady what happened and then walked away and wrote the story. There's 9 other people that saw what happened. Right? And maybe she's biased, maybe she has a reason for telling me what she told me, and so forth. That's what we've done in Hawaiian history, just with that tiny portion of the population. About 6% of the population was the English-speaking population in Hawaii in 1893. So the 6% wrote mostly everything you know about Hawaiian history. That's a problem. So I'm going to show you some examples tonight of how that historiography has really embedded itself in our understanding of what Hawaii is. And then I'll get into the topic, which is the Republic of Hawaii. And I'm doing that because I can give you facts about the Republic, I can give you facts about the overthrow, I can give you facts about the Maile Constitution. But unless you understand why your kapuna didn't know those stories, unless you understand why the stories you heard are wrong, you won't start to understand that bigger, larger process. If you understand what happened in your Hawaii, then you go into all these histories going, wait a minute, where's the citation? Where's that primary source and so forth? Because you know that for 100 years in Hawaii, people purposely built a lie to tell us about Hawaii. So I'm going to show you some examples of that. I could be here for 7 hours showing examples. But I'm going to show you a few, just to show you the nature of how bad it got. The gentlemen that overthrew the Queen in 1893 were a minority. You know, one of the themes I'm going to talk about tonight is, the title of the talk is A Culture of Insecurity. Forever in Hawaii, we talked about the missionaries who came, took over Hawaii and so forth. And we've also talked about how they outlawed this and banned that and so forth, and they did this. And there were 30 or 40 missionaries in all of Hawaii at a certain time. At the top of this was 100. Give you an example. We've given them one they didn't have. This was a native-run nation. There's a historian, Justin Vance from HPU, who wrote an article about 5 years ago about the Civil War in Hawaii. And he wrote in his article that at the time of the Civil War in America, there were about 5,000 missionary families in Hawaii. There were never 500. There were 136 total missionaries that came to Hawaii in 100 years. So 5,000 families. But it's that idea that, of course, they were dominant, they were everywhere, they were running things. No. So when we start to understand what a minority we were, we learn two things. That Hawaiians were running things. And so we start to look at, well, but that doesn't make sense because this Western law dominated Hawaii and took over and so forth. And that was imposed by the Hawaiians. No, if Hawaiians did it, then it must be a different reason. And we start to understand how brilliant Kauikeoli was to use Western law to create a constitutional monarchy that would recognize and save Hawaii's independence for 50 years. And we start to go, wow, okay, now I start to see that story. So that historiography is an important part of that process. Okay? I'm going to talk a little bit about those topics, those instances, and then I'll get into the Republic. What I'm going to talk about the Republic tonight is I want to delegitimize the Republic because it wasn't illegitimate. Not only, Keanu and others have shown us distinctly how legally it had no force, but it was also ridiculous as an entity, as a governmental entity. It was a farce. It was absurd. Why? They didn't go out and set out, these were smart men. Sanford Noble was a constitutional lawyer. He didn't set out and say, I'm going to make the most ridiculous republic that ever existed. He was forced to do so because of the action of Kanaka-Uiwi. Hawaiians were constantly writing protests, writing resolutions, standing up and saying no, petitioning the U.S., and so forth. And so they knew this minority of Hawaii folks, the white folks in the kingdom, couldn't afford to be democratic. They'd have gotten outvoted and kicked out in a heartbeat. So they had to create a republic that really wasn't a republic. And they did that because of Hawaiian action. That's what I talk about tonight, is how this Republic of Hawaii was really Kanaka form. And show you how ridiculous it was. Okay? So let's start by talking about that historiography. I'm going to turn off this light if that's okay. If you're scared of the dark, you can hold hands. Okay. That way we can see that. The legacy of engagement. Okay, so I don't want you just to believe me. I want to show you how engaged, how brilliant, how progressive and modern the kingdom was under Hawaiian rule. Now, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I taught Hawaiian studies, the definition of a Hawaiian was not this stuff. It was, well, a little bit slow, not so great at school, maybe kind of lazy, and so forth. This shows us a different Hawaii. Let's look at this. In 1840, Maile Kauikeoli voluntarily cedes absolute rule for the benefit of his people and nation. So in 1840, he was an absolute ruler. Kauikeoli was a divine ruler. If he wanted something, it was done. If he wanted something, it was his. And he voluntarily gives up that power to create a constitutional monarchy that has a legislature, judiciary, and an executive. So he's giving up 2/3 of his power. Why? Because it's the only way he can save the nation. European powers are grabbing the nations throughout the Pacific, and he knows why he's next. So he moves to create a constitutional monarchy so they can gain recognition, so they can save the nation. Right? 1840. 1843, Hawaiian Kingdom becomes the first nation in the Pacific and the first non-European born nation in the world to achieve international recognition as a sovereign independent nation. Now, that's huge. And a lot of us have heard that by now, but really think about that. 1843, Hawaii became the first non-European born nation in the world to achieve recognition. This tiny nation of about 150,000 people got the same status as the United States, France, and other countries. Incredible achievement. That was a native-run, native-led nation. 1852, Mo'ikawi Keole Kingdom legislature declared universal mandate suffrage, regardless of race, within the Hawaiian Kingdom. It's part of the Kumukana Vai in 1852. So the Constitution of the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1852 had universal mandate suffrage. Chinese, Japanese, African American, any race could come to the Hawaiian Kingdom, own property, vote, and so forth. 1852. What's going on in the U.S.? What's going on in the U.S. a decade later? 1860s Civil War in America. So America is literally fighting itself. 600,000 deaths in America in a war over whether or not to own black people. And those same people could come to Hawaii and vote and become citizens and own property 10 years prior. That's an incredibly modern progressive nation led by Native Hawaiians. 1854, Mo'ikawi Keole declares Hawaiian Kingdom neutrality in the ongoing Crimean War, setting precedent for international laws on neutrality. Crimean War is happening. Warships are coming from both sides. He says, we're neutral. We're not taking sides. So, international law hadn't been that developed on neutrality yet. So, about a year and a half later, those countries had to come together in Europe and kind of form the basis of international law on neutrality. What does it mean that a country is neutral? And so forth. That came out of the Declaration of the Hawaiian Monarch, 1854. 1859, Mo'i Wahine Emma and Mo'i Alexander Lee raised funds to found a modern hospital to address the issues of mass death from introduced disease and improve health care for the nation. 1859, one of those modern hospitals around. They say, you told us to pray when we need help, and we've been doing that, and we're still dying. We see that you don't just pray, you go to a doctor. So we're going to build a hospital. And they built a hospital as one of those modern hospitals around. 1860, Hawaiian Kingdom uses its advanced status as an internationally recognized nation to assist the government of Japan in their efforts to open diplomatic negotiations with the United States of America. So, again, think of Hawaii's status in the world as compared to today. So, in 1860, Hawaii had more than a decade had recognition as an international recognized nation state. Japan didn't. Japan was recognized as a sovereign nation in 1893. So back in 1860, they had no diplomatic status, but they had sent a group of diplomats and warriors and so forth, that they wanted to go to the United States and talk about some things, trade and things like that. Kind of a diplomatic thing, but they didn't have any status. The ship gets hurt in a storm, they're forced to port in the harbor of Honolulu. So while they're here, the king of Hawaii and his foreign minister work with the Japanese delegation and actually assign them Hawaiian Kingdom passports. So they'll be able to enter the United States with official passports. So here's a situation where the Hawaiian Kingdom is helping a nation that doesn't have the same high status, Japan. Yeah? And we think today about how we think all of this stuff came from other places. Hawaii, 50 years before Japan had gained international recognition, is helping this nation along. 1860s, by the 1860s, the Hawaiian Kingdom was one of the most literate nations in the world, right? The literacy rate in the 1860s in America was around 72%, and Hawaii was around 90 to 95%. One of the most literate nations in the world. Okay. 1874, Mo'i Kalakaua, first head of state to appear before a joint session of U.S. Congress, first honoree of an official White House state dinner. How many of us knew that? How many of us heard that in school growing up? U.S. they have state dinners now, and super fancy dinner, and all the diplomats come, and the first one ever in the White House was for Kalakaua. Ulysses S. Grant held the first White House state dinner for Kalakaua. Yeah. Kalakaua was supposed to address the Congress as the first head of state ever to do so. He was sick, so he didn't actually address the Congress, but he was there. But again, that wasn't the French king, that wasn't the Spanish king, that was a Hawaiian monarch. 1880s, first monarch to circumnavigate the globe. Electricity at Iolani Palace before the White House. A proposed Polynesian and Asian federations. This was the EU 150 years before the EU. He said, the Europeans are dominating the Pacific. Let's get together. Samoa, Tonga, Aotearoa, Hawaii. Let's band together. Have a common currency. Have lower trade barriers and so forth. And push back against the rise of European power. Again, from a native-led nation. 1887, Hawaiian Kingdom maintains over 136 consulates and embassies on 6 continents across the globe. I've been studying Hawaiian history for a long time. I didn't know that. 136 consuls and embassies across across the world by the 1890s. San Diego, California, Pretoria, South Africa, Vladivostok, Russia, have Hawaiian Kingdom Council and Embassy. And they weren't just for show. They were there helping Hawaiian Kingdom subjects that were in trouble in those places. So, again, one of the most advanced, progressive, modern nations in the world, led by Native Hawaiians. 1890, Kui'Aina proposes women's suffrage as an amendment to the Constitution. Women's suffrage proposed by a Native Hawaiian political party 30 years before it actually happened under American rule. So, I show that to give you a sense of how progressive Hawaii was, how modern they were, one of the most modern progressive nations in the world. What happened to that story? Is that the story you heard when you went to school here? No. Is that the story your kapuna heard? Why and how? So again, back to 1893. They overthrow the kingdom. They're a minority. There's 115,000 brown folks and there's 6,000 white folks, and they're trying to run the country, and they're trying to claim that they're legitimate. They're trying to tell the United States, who's of the people, by the people, and for the people, we should be in charge. Doesn't make sense. So they got to go back to this old narrative of, well, you're right. The only argument they have is, you're right, we're outnumbered, but those folks aren't really folks. They're not really human. And they have to argue against that whole history I just showed you. Now, at the time, people are going to laugh at it. That's ridiculous. We know different. But they're going to publish and create documents and create textbooks and create things like that get left there. They're going to eliminate the language in 1896. You're not allowed to use Hawaiian as a language in schools anymore. And they know in the next 20, 30, 40 years, that back history is going to be forgotten and this new history is going to be taught. Okay? So this book that shows there, I'm going to read from you here. This is a book that was produced in 1899 by the Department of Education in Hawaii. This is an actual version. This is from 1899. This is my copy. A brief history of the Hawaiian people. And this was put out by W.D. Alexander, who was the president of the Board of Education in Hawaii. And it says, look front page, a brief history of the Hawaiian people, published by order of the Board of Education of the Hawaiian Islands. So it's officially from the Board of Education. So when you think about today, the DOE, this is the DOE back then. At the request of the Board of Education, I have endeavored to write a history of Hawaii. It's an awful book. A racist, talking about how Hawaiians aren't capable. The evils of Kalakaua's reign started with the reign of Kamehameha. You know, that type of thing. On and on and on about how Hawaiians aren't capable. And the most egregious part is, for me, is this part. There's a section where they're talking about early Hawaii and how things are coming today. And he talks about infanticide. Infanticide is the murder of your own children. It was a myth that was started about Hawaiians. Dr. David Stanner, Honey Kay's husband, wrote a book disproving the myth about 15, 20 years ago. But nonetheless, in 1899, this is what comes out about infanticide in Hawaii. And it says, quote, infanticide was fearfully prevalent, and there were few of the older women at the date of the abolition of idolatry who had not been guilty of it. It was the opinion of those best informed that 2/3 of all the children born in Hawaii were destroyed in infancy by their parents. They were generally buried alive, in many cases in the very houses occupied by their unnatural parents. The principal reason given for it was laziness, unwillingness to take the trouble of rearing children. So that narrative, right? 2/3 of Native Hawaiians buried their kids alive in the front yard because they didn't want to raise kids. That's the narrative that's in this book. Now, why is that important to know? The guy who wrote this is long dead. Doesn't help to get angry at him. The reason I'm telling you that is because this became a textbook for the schools. This was the official school textbook for every school in Hawaii, public and private, for 40 years. I'll show you here. The DOE said it's very necessary to have a work of this kind in the hands of the higher classes in our schools. A standard authority in school textbook for more than 40 years, 1899 to 1940. If you went to school in Hawaii, this was your school textbook on Hawaiian history. And they told you that about your kapuna. So when you think about your kapuna and what they heard and why things were different in the 40s and 50s and why folks ran away from being Hawaiian, because of this stuff, right? And this is the tip of the iceberg. So that starts in 1899. We move on to 1906, 1907. They changed the name of Honolulu High School to McKinley High School. They named it after American presidents. Today, as we sit here, there are 37 schools in Hawaii named after American presidents and generals. 2,500 miles from the United States. Plenty of wine jurisdictions up there, but we're not seeing that. That's the start of it. This was a textbook in the territorial schools of Hawaii. It was also the textbook at Leland Stanford University in 1894. So in American colleges, this is what they're learning about. Okay? We move from that to this, constructing a master narrative. So anybody go to McKinley High School? More importantly, anybody's parents in McKinley, or grandparents.
Yep.
McKinley High School, May 14th, 1928. Right? McKinley High School, May 14th, 1928. They're opening their new auditorium, their new school auditorium they just built. And they invite every parent and every student to come. Almost persuaded, say you have to come. The governor comes. The head of the Department of Education comes. Right? And they have this event there to open up the event, to open up the auditorium. The superintendent of public instruction is there. The mayor of Honolulu is there. The president of PTA is there. The president of the student body is there. And the address is given by Governor Wallace Ryder Farrington. All the bigwigs are there. We're going to talk to you about education. We're going to talk to you about how we're doing a great job educating your children. McKinley High School. So they have the event, Farrington gives a talk, and then they have the main event of the night, which is a play. They put on a play for the parents and the students. And the play is called The Racial Pageant.
Oh my God.
And this is the text of the play. This is the instructions of the play that I'm going to read to you. The Making of Americans in Hawaii. Now imagine this. You know, Lynette guys, and we all they do a fantastic job of doing the reenactment of the Hilo meeting. And it's moving because you're there, and you hear the voices, and you see the people acting it out. Same thing here, right? It's persuasive because you're seeing people embody these ideas. So imagine yourself watching this play with 700 other parents and children at McKinley. The chanters and warriors represent old Hawaii. So the Guts of Hawaii is over in the corner in Maile and so forth. They're going to chant and be warriors and represent Hawaii. The spirit of Hawaii as an actor enters and is received with a chant of welcome. So Hawaiian comes in, the guys chant for him. The spirit of McKinley comes as a representative of American education in Hawaii. So now the President of the United States comes in representing education in Hawaii. A Hawaiian child is brought forward by its mother and accepted by the spirit of McKinley. Then enters the principal racial groups of Hawaii, the Chinese, Portuguese, Anglo-Saxon, Japanese, Koreans, and Filipino. As the mothers of each group, so mothers literally brought their kids, as the mothers of each group enter with their children, the spirit of Hawaii welcomes them and entrusts the children to the spirit of McKinley. From the door of McKinley comes a band of various racial groups. They are the young Americans of Hawaii. They sing their alma mater. The spirit of America appears, and all sing the Star Spangled Banner. The audience is requested to join in the singing of the Star Spangled Banner. Right? So they have this play where they literally have the parents bring their kids up and offer them up to a Hawaiian who offers them up to McKinley. Right? That's the transfer of, of Kuleana to this American father. Right? That's the point they got to by 1928. By 1931, things like happened like the UH yearbook at UH Manoa. They used to put out a yearbook like high schools do. The UH yearbook at Manoa talks about the overthrow in a section of the yearbook called the Change. And under the change, they say the queen had ruled despotically, and her people rose up against her and removed her from the throne. That's the UH yearbook that I signed and bring one to my friends, and he signed and bring to show my dad, and my mom, and so forth. You're getting people onto that idea of those Hawaiians in the past that didn't deserve to rule. So I could go on for hours about that, but that's the level. Your kapuna buried their kids alive in the front yard. President McKinley, representing American education, showed up to save you, and now you give us your children and we'll take care of them. Yeah? All of these things happened in the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, to create by the 1850s and 60s this understanding that to be Hawaiian was the opposite of what I showed you in Star Wars. Okay? So that's the level of misinterpretation we had. So specifically, when we get to the overthrow, we get to 1894, what we've always said about the overthrow is that, by 1894, is that was a holiday thing. Yeah? About 10 years ago, I was working in Maputo, I was teaching Hawaiian Studies, and Dr. John Osorio, my boss, came to me and he said, Ron, I want you to be on this panel with me in a couple weeks, and I want you to talk about, the panel's about Hawaiian documents in history. I was like, oh, cool, great, I got 100 of them. I want to talk about this, I want to talk about that. He goes, and I want you to write about the Republic of Hawaii Constitution. Oh, like, you kidding me? Like, that's the last one in the world that would choose. Like, I don't want to write about how you guys started the Constitution. And he's like, oh, I'm like, cool, so you do it. But I started doing it, and I started going through the material, I started realizing, wait a minute, like this, I'm not a lawyer, but this republic is absurd. The way they created it is absurd. The Constitutional Convention was absurd. And I started realizing they're scared to death. This culture of insecurity, these guys are, if they don't pull off what they're attempting to do, they've committed treason. And the penalty for treason in any country is death. And so this small group of white men, with the help of the United States, have overthrown the Queen, taken over, pushed for annexation. It didn't happen, and now they're going, oh crap, right? To be detailed, in December 1894, the President of the United States had tried to restore the Queen. He didn't use military power to do so, so we had this lull. So they say we've got to have a permanent form of government, some kind of government. And they can't afford to have a democracy, right? They don't have the votes. So they're going to create a republic. A republic is one of the most democratic form of governments. Yet they can't afford to do that, so they're going to make a fake republic. So let's look at what that looks like. So Thomas Cooley, this was a little bit of background I just did. This is talking about Thomas Cooley, who's the highest authority of constitutional law in the United States, had said that the provisional government was illegitimate. He'd said they cannot annex the country. So they're doing all of these things that are forcing them to kind of, push back and create and do something that looks like a permanent government. So on March 15, 1894, Act 69 is passed, an act to provide for a constitutional convention. So the provisional government said we're going to have a constitutional convention, which sounds great. Bring delegates of the people together that you can vote on, and then they're going to decide how to create a republic. So they passed the act, but within the act, you're going to see that it says, there shall be convened at the call of the President a convention to frame a constitution. Said convention shall consist of the President, the Executive and Advisory Councils, and 18 delegates to be elected as herein provided. So, we're going to let you elect 18 guys to the Constitutional Convention. But us guys who are already in power are automatic people in there. Right? So how many automatic folks do you think are in there? If they're letting 18 be elected? 19. So 19 of the provisional government officers are delegates, and we'll let you elect 18. Now that's why? Because they have a majority, right? But you don't do that. Show me another constitutional convention in the world where they say the delegates get elected, but we're going to appoint a majority. It doesn't happen. So here, that's a red flag. So 100 years later, when I'm reading through these documents, I say, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. Why do I see that red flag? Because Hawaiians forced them to do that. Huiloha Aina had been having meetings protesting the coming of a constitutional convention. At Alii Palace across the street at Arian Hall, where the post office is today, that was where Huiloha Aina met, back on this side of the post office. And they had meetings where they demanded that they not have a constitutional convention. So they were forced to say, you can't have a real vote on this. Right? Okay, so 19 versus 18 delegates. Qualifications for electors. So if you want to vote on this, every male resident Hawaiian, American, or European by birth or descent. So enfranchisement. So they're saying residents. So if you live in Hawaii, you don't have to be a citizen or a subject or anything. If you live in Hawaii and you're white or Hawaiian, you can vote in this upcoming election. Again, I don't know of another country in the world that allows non-citizens to vote in their elections. It just doesn't happen. But they're going to do it here because that's going to allow the French, the Germans, and the people that support them here in Hawaii to vote. So non-subjects, or non-citizens at this point, of the provincial governments get to vote in this election. They're beefing up their roles. Enfranchisement. Every male resident of Hawaii or American or European birth or descent. Okay? Hawaii is the only country in the world where persons not citizens or subjects have the franchise. This comes from the Hawaiian Star. The Hawaiian Star is the official voice of the provincial government. It's the English language newspaper that speaks to the provincial government. It's pro-annexation, it's pro-American. And even they say the only country in the world where persons not citizens or subjects have the franchise, have the right to vote. It's absurd. Enfranchising, once again, exceptions. So if for some reason you don't meet those other requirements, you still get to vote if you're any person who was duly enrolled as a member of one of the lawful organized bodies of the military or police force prior to January 1st, 1894. So if you fought for the provisional government as a citizen's guard, as a Waterloo Rifles, or anything like that, don't care what your qualifications are, you get to vote. Again, an absurdity. Disenfranchisement. So we've added a bunch of white folks to the rolls. Who are we going to get rid of? Every male resident, Hawaiian, American, European by birth. This part here. Act 69 continued the disenfranchisement of all Asian voters, first enacted in the 1887 Maine Constitution. They're not listed here. Asians could vote in Hawaii since when? 1852, right? Every race could vote from 1852 on. The Maine Constitution in 1887 specifically said, except for Asians. And this continues then. So they're disenfranchising all Asians, they're enfranchising resident white folks, or military. Every male resident, Hawaiian, American, or European or birth resident shall take the oath by this act provided. And they're going to disenfranchise anyone who doesn't take this oath. So what does the oath say? I, blank, age blank, years, and a native of blank, residing in blank, in said district, do hereby solemnly swear in the presence of Almighty God that I will support and bear true allegiance to the provisional government of the Hawaiian Islands, and will oppose any attempt to reestablish monarchical government in any form in the islands. So imagine an election in the United States. Imagine next year's election for president. And they say, okay, so to vote in the U.S. presidential election, you have to be a registered Republican. That's ridiculous. Or a registered Democrat. You're only one side. Only people agree with you to vote. That's what they're saying. So again, they're disenfranchising anyone who won't swear to forswear monarchy, to get rid of monarchy. So of course, the vast majority of Hawaiians aren't going to vote. So you're getting rid of Hawaiian vote, getting rid of Asian vote, and you're enfranchising out your resident white folks. Reverend Charles Hyde was a pro-annexation American who was pastor of the Kulakapunapulipokopika Akau, which was the North Pacific Missionary Institute. He trained all the Hawaiians to become pastors in schools around Hawaii. And he was pro-annexation, he was hardcore, but he was also honest. He wrote in this letter, the men who are clamoring for a government of the people propose to bar out Hawaiians altogether. You say, what are we doing? This is ridiculous. Again, ridiculousness, absurdity, because they're forced to do that by economic action. The Hawaiian Star, once again, official voice of the British government, declared the idea that voting was a natural right of all persons pure fiction. So you don't have a natural right to vote. Voting is a privilege granted by the state to such persons or classes as are deemed most likely to use it for the public weal is like the well-being. So the Star is arguing, voting's not a right of yours. You have to be a good voter. You decide that, right? The Daily Bulletin says, perhaps they foresee that the desperate schemes adopted to pack the convention on the part of the party organizations, as well as the government, will prove to be only a foretaste of the political methods that will characterize the working of a Republican establishment. Although Republicanism in itself cannot be held to account for the grotesque expedients of this occasion, it must be remembered that the present masters of Hawaiian affairs want anything but a pure Republican system. Under such a system, they would not be allowed to rule. So it's not my opinion, it's not a secret, it's not something Hawaiians were saying. Everybody around town was looking at what was going on. These are the English language pro-annexation papers. And they're saying, this is ridiculous. This whole convention is ridiculous. So May 2nd, 1894, to create a republic, nationwide, so they had a vote. Nationwide, among Hawaii's more than 100,000 residents, less than 4,000 votes were cast. Less than 4,000 votes out of 100,000. I'll check that. See where we are in that area. 1 second. Okay, we're good. The largest voting blocks by ethnicity were Portuguese, American, and British. So 100,000, more than 100,000 people, you get 4,000 votes. Native Hawaiian participation. On Oahu, a total of 185 Kanaka Oiwi from a Kanaka Oiwi population of approximately 12,000. 1.5% registered to vote in the election of Kanakawi. 1.5%. Again, all of these, I'm being repetitive, all of these things show us, as an academic, as a normal person, as anybody, reading the materials from this convention, looking back, we notice how ridiculous it is. We notice it because of Kanaka passion. District of Lahaina, Oluwalu, and Kaanapali, 61 total votes from a population of approximately 2,600 people. 0.2% of the vote. So, they elect the delegates, they got 19 appointed, they got 18 that are elected, they come in, and they're going to have a constitutional convention. So how do you go to a constitutional convention? You meet, you talk, you set up rules, you say, okay, we're going to hash stuff out. Who's got an idea? That's not what they did. They handed the Constitutional Convention a constitution that was basically done. That Dole, Thurston, and others had put together. So Dole writes Burgess. Burgess is the president, he's the chair of the political science department at Georgetown University. He writes to Dole in the writing back and forth about, how are we going to do this in the legislature? We can't afford to let people really vote, so how are we going to do this? So Burgess makes some recommendations. Here's one of them where he says, with this situation, I understand your problem to be the construction of a constitution which will place the government in the hands of the Teutons, the white folks, and preserve it there, at least for the present. I think you can accomplish this with existing material at your hand. Pay great attention to the construction of the judicial system. Appoint your judges for life, or during good minister equal justice to all, and appoint only Teutons. Right? So the judiciary is where you want to watch out for. Appoint only white folks, and appoint them for life. That's what his recommendation is to go. Thurston comes in with his draft. He borrows it from the 1891 Mississippi State Constitutional Convention. Now, I laugh because I'm from Arkansas. And I can tell you, you can only imagine what the 1891 State Constitution for Alabama was like. Right? One of the most racist documents you can imagine. That's what Thurston models his participation document on. Permanently disenfranchises the enemies of the PG by name. So, like, do you think this is absurd? In the Constitution, Laura Thurston wants to name people who aren't allowed to vote for life, including James Bush, Iosepa Navahi, William White, Charles Wilson, Colburn, Sam Parker, and others. So Thurston says these guys, I want their names written in the Constitution that they can't vote. That's how scared they were, right? That's how scared Navahi made them, and William White made them. That they had to literally put their names in the Constitution, but they're not allowed to vote. PG approval. So they met in the executive building, which is next to us here. They called the Palace Executive Building once they take over. 27th of April to 28th of May, where each proposed article was voted on by the Executive Council and Friends of the Provisional Government. And there's the people they also invited. You'll see some of the names you recognize in there. Wilder, Alexander, Carter, Castle, Brown, Baldwin. Here's the Constitutional Convention photograph. This is the proceedings. So they published the proceedings. The thing I love about these guys is they were stupid enough to write down everything they thought and leave it in an archive. I mean, we literally have the writings about that. There are arguments about this and back and forth. And I have a limited amount of time tonight, so I can't show you all the examples, but it's just, you just need to go through it. You know, these public presentations are so important, I think, because you carry stories out of them, but like, I truly believe that if the people of Hawaii, we gathered every person in Hawaii into a great auditorium, and we walked them through, just didn't even say anything about it, just walked them through the minute, they would start to understand what happened. They'd start to understand the depth of the lies, the depth of the insecurity of these men, and what they had to create. I'll give you an example. So it's unrelated to this, but related, but barely. In 1900, the Organic Acts were passed to create the territory of Hawaii. 1898 to 1900, a commission came together to write those. So you're talking about the fundamental law of the territory of Hawaii. The man who led that commission was Senator Morgan, John Tyler Morgan. And then John Tyler Morgan was a former Grand Master of the KKK in Alabama. Talk about absurdity. He had proposed a law in the United States Congress to expatriate all blacks back to Africa on federal funds. He was an ardent, avowed, declared racist. And he designed the laws that became the territory of Hawaii. Does everybody know that? We start to know those things, and we start to say, yeah. So, I'm going to show two topics that came up in that constitutional convention. There's lots of them to talk about. I'm going to show two in particular: women's suffrage and this thing called special rights and citizenship. So, women's suffrage, women voting. So, what was it like prior to 1893? What was it like prior to the 1870s, 60s, 50s, 40s? When was the first U.S. Supreme Court justice who was a woman? Who was it? Sandra Day O'Connor. Sandra Day O'Connor. 1981. 1981. So the U.S., the most progressive, modern nation in the world, got a woman Supreme Court justice in 1981. When did Hawaii have a woman Supreme Court justice? 1840. The first Constitution. The first Constitution named a Supreme Court, and the governors of the islands were also Supreme Court justices. Kekau and Kekuanaoa were two of the justices. So we had a woman Supreme Court justice in 1840. We had women like Princess Ruth who had power and influence in the kingdom. We had women, running things prior to we evolved, right? So this idea of democracy for women, right, kind of took a backstep with the American world. So we see here, in the 1894 Constitutional Convention, you're going to see women's suffrage come up. But it had come up previously. In 1890, Kuikala'aina proposed women's suffrage in the Hawaiian Kingdom legislature. Joseph Navahi and William Punova White bring in petitions for women's suffrage to the 1890 Hawaiian Kingdom legislature. They don't have enough votes, so it doesn't happen. But they're pushing that in 1890. 1892, day 3 of the legislature, Navahi presents a petition that would be allowed to vote. He's trying it again in 1892. Joseph Navahi has a petition from women in Hilo saying we deserve the right to vote. So, preparation for the 1894 Con. On May 2, a meeting on women's suffrage, 40 women present. Mrs. Whitney spoke in favor, Mrs. Freer cast on all support. So a lot of the house women, a lot of the wives of the leaders of the so-called provisional government are pushing for women's suffrage, along with the Kanaka women. So they have a petition signed by 117 women and 83 men. They bring it to the Constitutional Convention. And you'll see here, so one thing I want to mention, and I was going to mention at the beginning, I'll mention it now and afterwards. Through the work of the Hawaii State Archives, more specifically Adam Jansen, who's our state archivist, and I say his name because he's the one who literally, he assigned me to do it, and then he got excited about it, so he took over. He literally, physically himself, scanned every document we have on the 1894 Constitutional Convention, digitized it, and it's up online for the public now. So when I gave this talk a couple weeks ago at Punahou, from that day, every document we have about this Constitutional Convention is available to the public anywhere in the world. I'll show you how to get that website. But 7,000 documents, 7,000 pages he scanned. And they're all online to the public. So, this one is, so the guys are talking about it, like maybe we should do this, maybe we shouldn't. And the women make some good cases. And they say, well, how many women could vote? They say, well, we should do an income clause, definitely. Because we don't want poor folks, aka Hawaiians, to vote. So we'll put an income clause in it. But with that income clause, even, you might be surprised to find out, there were 171 women who held stock in Hawaiian corporations in 1893. This isn't because of the PG, because of the overthrow, because of American advancement. This is in 1893, right? 86 women had stock worth $1,000 or more in the 1890s. 38 women had stock between $1,000 and $2,000. 12 women in 2,000, 3,000, and 35 women had stock in companies worth more than $3,000 in 1893. Right? And here's an ethnic breakdown. Americans, British, Germans, half-castes, so it shows you, that women had economic power in the kingdom also. So the guys make a sense for who's going to vote if we let this happen. June 13th, they submitted to the Constitutional Convention by committees of women's suffrage, Mrs. Freer, Castle, Hall, Whitney, and Hooper, respectfully asking that by provision of the Constitution, women be entitled to the right of suffrage with an educational property qualification. They submitted examples of successful women's suffrage. The first women in the world to be allowed to vote happened a year prior to this. In what country? You can't answer, really. What was the first country in the world to allow women to vote? It was a Polynesian country. Aotearoa, New Zealand. 1893, women in New Zealand across the country could vote. First country in the world. Now there have been women in states of the United States, Wyoming, Colorado, who were able to vote. But New Zealand was the first country. So they say, hey, the Maori women got it last year. So they come together. The majority report recommends acceptance of education. So the majority of men, those appointed and elected, after the Constitution say, yeah, it's a good idea. And it passes that first vote. But then the full convention rejects it 22 to 8. Well, why did the full group reject it? So you go back to the meeting minutes and you read it and talk about the fact that, yes, and they literally write up and say, yes, you're right, morally, practically, women should have the right to vote, but we can't afford to do that in our situation. Yeah? There's too many brown women who are going to vote. We're vastly outnumbered. So the vote on women's suffrage dies at that point. The second article we'll talk about is Article 17, Special Rights and Citizenship. Again, think about this. You know, we talk about corruption in government, so like this was not joking. This was a law. Special rights and citizenship. So there's a lot of folks in Hawaii who are white, who are pro the republic and provisional government and so forth, but they don't want to become actual citizens of that country because, you know, what if something happened? What if those guys lose? And I don't want to give up my citizenship back home. I want to keep my German citizenship or my American citizenship and so forth. So the Republic creates a special way they can vote in our elections, but not actually be citizens. It's called literally special rights of citizenship. Any person, not a Hawaiian citizen, who took active part or otherwise rendered substantial service in the formation of, or has supported the provisional government of Hawaii, shall be entitled to all the privileges of citizenship, without thereby prejudicing his or her native citizenship or allegiance. So you can vote in our elections if you helped us out and you supported us, and you don't even got to become a citizen. That's part of the Constitution that they're creating. So who's it aimed at? So I've gone through the special rights. There's 4,117 awarded in the course of 7 months. So basically, they double their voter rolls because they know the world's watching, and they know the countries around the world, including the United States, said, "You guys are a real public." You had 120,000 people there, and you had 4,000 people voting. So they've got to do. So they're doubling their voter rolls by going out and adding white folks who have supported them already, but don't want to actually lay their lives on the line and become citizens. Whoops, we go back to women here. So support like the franchise. So this is the point I just said. Out of that amount, only 120 of the women could be depended on tobacco annexation and PG. The rest were all pronounced royalists. So that's the reason the women's suffrage vote died. Okay. Okay. So special rights of citizenship. They look like this, the originals. We've got 4,000 of them in the state archives. So I went through, I created an Excel spreadsheet, where it was done, when the hearing was, what the testimony was, where they were from, and so forth. It's basically about adding white voters to the rules. The vast majority, almost 70% of the special rights of citizenship are awarded to Portuguese on the plantations. For the sake of voting, Portuguese were considered one. And there's a lot of things we can't get to for sure. How do we know why those folks signed up? It's said, and it's my mouth, I've read quite a bit of it, that they would go after the plantation, and they would sign up 200, 300 people at a time. So likely, the Luna says, go sign this document. And then the Luna comes back in October and says, go vote. So, you know, how much involvement was the participation of each individual person, we don't know. But what we do know is they signed up a lot of new votes. This is one example. July 31st, 1894. Manuel de Paiva, age 26, born at the Azores. He's a laborer, resided in Hawaii for 15 years, current resident of Papaico. Special rights and citizenship Maui hearings. So these are the Maui hearings. I've created a kind of spreadsheet. 441 cases heard, 409 awards, 32 denied, 92.5% were awarded. And there's the countries of origin about how they were awarded. So 67% of that were Portuguese, 12% American, 4% German, Scottish, Norway, and so forth. Yeah? And this happens around the islands. Different percentages in different islands, depending on plantations and so forth. Here's Oahu, 32% American, 26% Portuguese, and so forth. Yeah? So again, increasing your voting population. But again, think about it, they didn't actually become citizens. There's a really horrible note in the archives, an archival note. We do accession notes, we do notes sometimes in the materials to talk about problems that come up because of the collection and so forth. And in the 1930s and 40s, the territorial archivist wrote a note that said, there's a lot of folks coming in the archives, bringing their component in, saying, my grandfather signed up as a citizen back in 1894, and he's looking for his papers so he can prove that he's a citizen of the United States. And they go back and they find this, and they have to say, no, he didn't become a citizen. He signed up for rights of citizenship. Yeah? So they weren't getting citizenship. They were signing up and getting the rights to vote under the special rights of citizenship. Now, and one of the most interesting parts for me was coming across these guys. And the vast majority of them are people I've never heard of. Portuguese on the plantation, Lunas, things like that, Sugar Boy, which is but then I start to come across these names that I recognize. And I realize these are the guys that led the overthrow. Folks like Henry Cooper. Henry Cooper was the American who stood on the side of the American building and read the proclamation saying there is no more monarchy, we're now a provisional government. He was the guy that literally read the overthrow. And he doesn't have the guts to become a citizen of that republic he's creating. So he's going to get special rights of citizenship instead. That's a culture of insecurity. He didn't, it was Cooper, Waterhouse, several of these guys that were in the Committee of 13 said, this is the most prestigious thing we've ever done. We have moral right on our side. God is with us. I ain't becoming part of that country. Right? They were too scared to even become part of the country they were creating. Henry Cooper, James A. King, might recognize that name, Henry Waterhouse, A.B. Atherton, C. Hall, John Hood Jr., A.F. Judd, Jimmy. The Supreme Court Justice Albert Francis Judd, his son, wouldn't become a citizen of the Republic, but they wanted him to go. So here you see, oops, go back to one, sorry. So this is the actual Constitution here. And so it's this idea of taking a part of that history. You know, there's a quote that a guy wrote, very little has been written about the Republic. And that's true in a lot of Hawaiian history. There's so many things that nobody's really delved into, especially from the Hawaiian side. But the big thing written on the Republic was written by Donald Rowland called The Establishment of a Republic in Hawaii for the Pacific Hawaiian Journal. And he says, in Hawaii, the members of the provisional government maintained control without difficulty. The Royalists, while very hopeful that Cleveland's policy would lead to a restoration of monarchy, were willing to await action by the U.S. government. So they're passive, they're hopeful. You know, we'll see what happens. Hawaiians were out there in the streets, having meetings, demanding this. And to be honest, Huiahoa Ilohaina was also importing guns and weapons in case they needed them. Right? So they were active, they were engaged, they were forcing absurdity by that small minority that ruled the country. Yeah? So when we talk about a fake republic, or we talk about, and so forth, now you have evidence. And you can go home, I'll show you that website, you can go home and pull it up yourself and show folks. It's not just that I hate that republic, it's not just that I hate those guys who did it. I can show you how absurd they were. They created a constitutional convention that had a majority of appointed members. They created a citizenship for foreigners. You didn't even have to become a citizen. Right? All of those red flags in this black and white record, they're shown to us because of Kanaka action. So when you start to think about other events in Hawaiian history, I was taught, and up until that period, it was such a sad story. You read and you said, all of these defeated, but there were a lot of victories. The fact that the Treaty of Annexation was defeated in 1898, it's an amazing victory, right? Now, the U.S. went ahead and stole the country anyway, but Hawaii stopped annexation in 1898. We never learned that. We never heard it that way. The Republic, same kind of story. So when you start to look at these things that they did, turning the 1895 Land Act, look for the absurdities within those acts, and understand that every time you see something like that, it's because of people like Joseph Navani, people like William Kunoa, wife, and so forth. And we start to give credit for this, for the culture of insecurity that these men had, to the component of it here and took action. Mahalo.
with the Alexander.
He is. So he's the son of the first Alexander. William DeWitt went to college back in the United States. You know, I think an important point to make about missionaries. My dissertation and my hopefully forthcoming book is on native churches in a way. And the important point to make is the distinction between these folks and the missionaries. We often, you know, it might sound like a small detail, but we often mislabel the folks who were through the Queen as missionaries. They weren't. Missionaries were folks sent out by the ABCFM under contract. These were sons and grandsons of missionaries who were often had a much different view on these matters. Sereno Bishop, Artemis Bishop was your average run-of-the-mill racist. Sereno was vociferous and detested Hawaiians and so forth. You see it in his reading. So where did he get that? You know, that's a question I didn't know the answer. There's some clues. They went to school back in the United States at a time when Darwin was being taught, racial theory, manifest destiny, you know, so maybe they picked it up in college. But when they come back to Hawaii in 1863, in the 1850s and 60s, in 1863, Boston, the American Protestant Church, pulls out of Hawaii and says, you guys have done your job, awesome. You've created a Christian nation, you know, now come home. And some of the sons and grandsons who had places of authority in the church and business and so forth said, I don't like it here. I don't want to go. I don't want to give up my pulpit. But the important point to notice is not only were Hawaiians fighting this, but how they were too. The ABCFM was fighting this. They sent Rufus Anderson. Rufus Anderson was the architect of the missions across the world. Rufus Anderson came to Hawaii in 1863, went around to the churches and said, what the hell are you guys doing? They said, what the heck are you guys doing? He said, these are supposed to be native-run, native-led churches. They're congregationalists. They're not about centralized power. He said, you guys are missionaries, not pastors. And he calls them out for it. He says, since 1820, you've ordained 4 native pastors in 1863. And so, what the sons of the mission did at that point to hold on to power was turn that former mission, and I'm not defending, I'm not a Christian. I'm actually a non-theist. I'm a Buddhist. So I'm not defending Christianity. But regardless of what you think about Christianity, those early missionaries, their task was to bring the gospel to Hawaii. Their sons and grandsons changed that mission into one of political control, of racial dominance, and so forth. So be careful when we use that term missionaries. But so there's that turn towards these guys in 1863. So it's a long answer to the fact that so he's part of that. We need to hold on to power. We got some land in the Maile, and so forth. But that's different than his father. That's different than other fathers. And that's Hawaiians say that. Hawaiians in the newspapers. In the newspaper, in 1893, 94, 95, they say it again and again in the newspaper. We mahalo binamu guys. We thank Brigham guys for bringing the gospel of Christ. Their sons and grandsons have become apostates. They call them out. So they knew the church. They knew their relationship with God, and they said, we're real Christians. They're what Christianity is. So again, I'm not defending Christianity. I'm saying that to Hawaiian Christians of the 80s and 90s, these guys were missionaries. They were overseas. Any questions? Yes.
Okay, these guys are very afraid of treason.
Right.
They have actually been treasonous.
Right.
So when the Queen is, and I'm not sure my primary sources here, but I read that the Queen would not agree that she would not charge them if she came back into power.
Right.
Did that have an impact on Cleveland?
Yes. So I was just reading that the other night. So there's a really interesting story that goes on. So we tend to think of these things as, what did that side do? What did this side do? There were factions within the sides. Even the white side, right? There were some folks like Wilcox and others who weren't monarchists. I don't want to get too much off topic, but we use that term royalist for everybody. They were royalists. A royalist was somebody who supported the monarchy. A loyalist was somebody who supported the nation, a lot of ways. Folks like Robert Wilcox and others, at certain points, didn't want the monarchy anymore. They wanted a republic run by Hawaiians. So still Hawaiian run, but no more monarchy. They were loyalists. So that was the factions on the Hawaiian side. On the Alii side, it was basically the Dole faction and the Thurston faction. Dole, might get flack for this, but Dole wasn't the worst of them. He was a constitutional lawyer, brilliant, and somewhat fair-minded at times. To give an example, all these guys are complicated. In 1903, one of the guys from the U.S. Supreme Court writes to Dole and says, "Hey, we have letters." He says, "I want to invite you to a dinner. We're going to enroll you in the American Bar Association as a member." And Dole writes back and says, "No, I wouldn't be any part of an organization that doesn't allow African Americans in an organization." Senator Dole. I'm not saying he was a racist. I'm saying it's a complication, right? So Dole was somewhat at times level-headed. Thurston was just crazy. He was angry and racist and so forth. And so when Minister Willis goes to the Virgin, he goes to the yes, the Queen at first, and she said it for a number of reasons. In my mind, reading those documents, she was angry. She was hurt at what happened. So there was a little bit of that in there. But she was also following law. She didn't have the power to do that without the consent of the legislature. And there's a brilliant part of this. This is why it's, I read back and I'm so blown away by how brilliant they were. I always thought of royalists and Huilohaina as just the Queen walks in and you just bow down and do what she says. And they were that to a degree, but they were also, the bigger picture was about Queen. Joseph Navahi and Huilohaina write a letter to the Queen in 1894, and they tell her, respectfully, we've heard rumor, because rumor had gone around town that the Queen might turn over sovereignty for a certain lump sum of money. And Navahi and Huilohaina write her and say, with all due respect, you don't have the power to do that. This is for the people. The people of Hawaii will decide. Right? So when Willis comes to the Queen and says, the president wants you to forgive these guys, she says no at first. And she says, one reason she says is, well, because what if I pardon them, you guys leave, your ship leaves, and 2 months later they do the same thing again. And they kill me. So, and the second thing she says is, I don't have the power to do that legally. I would have to consult the cabinet and the legislature. If they agreed, I could do that. But the president of the United States insists, keeps insisting. He's facing political troubles back home. Right? We always wonder why, Cleveland. We honor Cleveland and talk about what a saint he was, and it's so great. But he didn't follow through with what he was going to do. He didn't take that final step to make sure and his argument would be, I couldn't. I've been voted out of office. Hawaii was an issue on the American plate of issues. President Cleveland had other problems. If he fires on white American citizens and kills them in order to restore a brown queen 2,000 miles away, that's not good politics. So he was worried about that. So Willis tells the Queen, you have to. So she finally agrees. She says, okay. So Willis goes to PG and says to them, the president has decided you need to step down. We're restoring the Queen. The PG has a meeting. Dole says, I guess we lost. She's going to pardon us. We'll go back to, we'll see what we can do. And Thurston says, no, I think they're bluffing. I don't think they're going to fire on us. I don't think they're going to take military action. Let's call their bluff. And Thurston's faction wins out. We came that close to restoration. But Thurston's faction says, no, I think they're bluffing, and they were right. They said, no, we're not going anywhere. Run out, and the U.S. backed off.
Who does he think will take military action against them? He's not saying that the United States has flipped. All the United States need to do is not continue to threaten them. I mean, at the takeover, there's 132 Marines. How long does that military presence last? For years? Is there just a ship out there threatening them? Because that's what's confusing to me, is after the Blunt report, and then Cleveland says, well, that's the situation. Whatever he thinks or he doesn't think, all he needs to do is not militarily support the provisional government.
But that's not necessarily true, because there's whether or not the PG or the Republic could have held on to power is up for debate. The U.S. was really the determining factor in who's going to be the permanent government. If the U.S. had just backed off at that point and done nothing, then there would have been civil war, and who knows what would have happened. Who knows? I don't know.
How could there be civil war? You said there's 6,000
because they had the only well-trained militia in town. The 1870s, 1880s, after Bayonet, 1887, the militias were torn apart by the Bayonet Constitution. There was no organized. The Wilcox Rebellion, if we're honest about it, and you go look at the documents, they had shotguns that were half broken, 10 years old. They had people that weren't trained to fire them. The PG had Honolulu Rifles, the Sushin Club, the Germans. They had several militias that were well-trained militias. I'm not saying they would have won, but it would have been difficult to unseat a well-trained militia with guns and weapons with what they had.
Was that an openly known thing?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the Wilcox Rebellion, never even came close to being successful. You can't ask terraformers to fight a militia that's been training 2 days a week for the last 20 years. You can, but the outcomes are probably not going to be good. So I don't know. The Hawaiians might have won that physical fight, but maybe not. And the Queen didn't want to take the chance. The Queen said, on January 17th, the Queen said, I don't want to lose another Hawaiian life. So it was really a matter of, the U.S. was the deciding factor in who becomes that government. And also importantly, when the U.S. backs off from its policy of restoration, other nations step in and recognize the Republic, and so forth. So then you start to say, wait a minute, those other nations may step in and defend the Republic.
What was the point of even being recognized by all these countries? From what I read, Great Britain and somebody else, within 24 hours, they recognized the provisional government. What was...
Well, recognition, so there's the legal sense and the practical sense. In the legal sense, we can talk all the time about, well, this is illegal, but what matters is what's happening on the ground. When Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown in Libya about 4 or 5 years ago, the French recognized the rebel groups. They didn't have power. There were guys around. So it's a political move, right? People always say, why didn't somebody step in? Why didn't England step in? Why didn't France step in? Why didn't Japan step in? They had treaties with Hawaii. Yeah, they had treaties, but they weren't going to step in and fight the United States. It didn't make political sense. So at that point, those recognitions were a matter of politics and money. Who's going to win? They're looking at this. And maybe I'm jaded, but it's not about it. For the vast majority of those countries making those decisions, it wasn't about what was right.
So treaties are meaningless.
I didn't say that.
Well, it feels like that. All they have to do is not acknowledge them for 24 hours.
Right.
I mean, that's not.
And that's the argument that some of us have made for a long time, is that it's super important to push the issue of legality. But if no one's going to enforce the law, and who's going to enforce the law? So yes, treaties are important, but yes, countries can say, I don't follow that anymore. Look at, especially nowadays, look at, 20 years ago, Russia or China would get a decision from the UN they didn't like, and they'd say, well, we're not going to listen. Now the US does. Now everyone does. So it's important. I don't want to diminish the importance of those documents. That's the reason we can fight today and make a legitimate argument. But again, there's a practical side too. You have to win that battle too. Question on history? Yes.
The Asians, okay, the Bayonet Constitution prohibited them from voting. What were their percentages at that time?
A lot more Japanese than Chinese. And actually, it's really Kawani has done kind of an economic survey of that. It's really fascinating. By the 1890s, the Chinese had a lot of economic power in Honolulu. A lot of businesses, a lot of things like that. And we talk about the Hawaiian always being underexplored. That's really underexplored. And I don't know why, because we have lots of students. But the Chinese language newspapers, those letters and stuff like that. I'm going through, the last few weeks, I've been going through the diplomatic correspondence between the American Council, or the Hawaiian Council in Tokyo and home. And it's fascinating. So the emperor in Japan is deciding what to do about all this, right? We know that, and we can make some assumptions about the fact that there was royalist support among the Japanese. There's a group of documents. It's called the specials reports. I call them spy reports. The provisional government and the Republic were hiring special detectives to go out and spy on Huiloha and other groups. And folks literally joined up and went to meetings and went back and reported. Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians. And so they would get these reports. And one of the reports is really interesting from Maui. It talks about, Navahi visited, and they talked about this, and so forth and so forth. And it says, Daniels, so Daniels is the guy I've been researching. Daniels was a Hawaiian judge in Wailuku. It says Daniels is importing guns and weapons from Honolulu, and he's hiding them in straw that he's bringing into the plantations. So the spy is saying the Japanese and Chinese are hiding guns on the plantations. So how they wouldn't think about looking there. but that they're supporting the Queen. So we don't have a lot of evidence. There's been a lot of research done there, but when you assume their rights were taken away by these guys, so you assume they were anti-PG and Republic, pro-monarchy. Again, it comes down to politics as far as why they didn't step in. You know, the letters coming from Tokyo, the Republic and PG counselor is pushing the emperor to recognize the provisional government, and he won't do it. But he eventually does, right? A lot of those folks, a lot of those countries were honestly seeing who they thought was going to win. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I also read in the newspapers, in the 19th century newspapers, that whatever the debate in, the Chinese people were turning out to the masses that we kind of organized because they had lost the right to vote. Yeah, I mean, and large numbers too, surprisingly.
And there's a relationship there, and that's a fascinating topic, and I really wish somebody would research it. But there's a relationship there that's just it's really interesting. So the 1901 legislature, which I've written about, I wrote about an article a few years ago in Hawaiian History. The first territorial legislature in Hawaii, the Hawaiian Home Rule Party, they won that legislature. They had almost a 2/3 majority. So the first time since 1893, Hawaiians have some power. And the executive is the governor's appointed. The judges are all appointed. But the legislature is democratic. And Hawaiians win. So what happens in that first legislature? They pass bill after bill after bill to grow Hawaii. They take all the tax off of any implements used to grow terra. They push for bilingual schools. Now, all these things, and interestingly, they push for an accounting of monies that were lost by the Chinese in the fire that had just happened in Chinatown. And they say that we should make reparations to the Chinese. Now think about that. The Chinese didn't have any political power. They couldn't vote. So Hawaiians didn't have to. There was no political gain in supporting the Chinese in 1901, but they did. So there's that relationship between those groups, that was seemingly very strong.
What was the thing about the Queen and the money and Wilcox? They write and tell her that she doesn't have the authority to do that.
Oh. So yeah, I got the letter. I talked about it at an event we did with Lynette for his birthday. So there were lots of rumors flying around town about the negotiations the Queen was having with the United States. Some of them were that, well, some Hawaiian leaders are going to agree to remove Lili'u and bring in Kaitulani. Maybe the U.S. would be happy with that. And Kaitulani wants to be a figurehead. She's so young and she's a woman, and so the white guys are still ruled. So there was some talk about that. But there was also a rumor that the U.S. would make the Queen an offer of certain monies. We'll give you, we took your crown lands, we took all your lands, blah, blah, blah. So we'll give you $1 million, and you tell us that we own Hawaii now. It's just any legal power, but that was what they were planning to do. So that was a rumor. I doubt it, but I don't know. But so Nawahi and Hui Lahaina writes her and says, and to me, it's so interesting because it had to be a difficult letter, right? She's your queen.
Isn't it almost insulting to believe that she would do that?
Well, maybe, but what's more important? Hurting her feelings or making sure? Because I think that speaks hard, because it exists, the letter exists. So my motto is, the Lahui was the ultimate. We love you and adore you and support you, but we want to make sure this rumor is not true, because the ultimate was the Lahui. That's what it means to me. That's why I find it so fascinating. It must have been a super difficult letter, right? And it's signed by Nawahi and Bush and Nawahi and B.B. Connie and those guys. Yeah. See, I'll pull it up real quick. Oh, I'll share with you while I'm doing this. There it is. So this letter, where I found this letter, so when the Queen was arrested in 1895, the first thing that Albert Francis Judd and William Owen Smith, Attorney General, did, they went over to Washington Place, they broke open her safe and her writing desk, and they took everything out of there and seized those documents to use against her trial. And those are called the seized documents. We have in the state archives. So when the Queen, 2 years before the Queen passed, she told the Alkea, she wrote to the Alkea and said she wanted all her things to go to the territorial archives. And so that's why we have it. But everything that was taken out of her safe was her most important stuff. And this letter is in it. And it's to Her Majesty. The undersigned, loyal, and respectful subjects of the Hawaiian Kingdom take the liberty of humbly submitting to Your Majesty the following. That the officers of Hui Lahaina, over 8,000 registered voters, in their capacity, okay. Therefore, the undersigned feel it's important, an imperious duty of theirs to respectfully represent to Your Majesty that the members of Hui Lahaina are at present laboring under serious apprehensions and fears, lest though through ill-advised and hasty concessions, the future of the kingdom may be jeopardized at the very moment when the impending restoration of Your Majesty. It has been announced by local papers and not contradicted that Minister Willis, after negotiating with Your Majesty personally and secretly, without the advice or any real representatives of your people, has requested or offered the provisional government to surrender on condition of Your Majesty promising to respect the old bayonet Constitution of 87, agreeing to grant the rebels, But then he writes, the restoration of the Queen, being not a favor but an obligation of justice on the American government, ought to be done without any restrictive conditions. And Your Majesty owes to the Hawaiian people who have stood by you to now stand by them and not sacrifice one iota of their rights. Certain concessions might be granted, only such as might be personal to Your Majesty, ought to be acceded to privately. But any conditions that the whole nation, blah, blah. We talk about amnesty, if the rumors are correct. By Your Majesty conceding these 2 points, if the rumors be correct, you are therefore virtually surrendering yourself and your people to the enemy. And they were very straightforward what they were saying to her. Your Majesty's strength lies in the fight made for you by Hui Lahaina. Signed, Joseph Navahi, J. Cummins, B.P. Connick, Bush, and so forth. Yeah, so it's a really, telling letter. They were really telling her, don't make any deals with us.
But then, the rumors, and rumors could have been started from people that want to create.
Right, division. Well, and in my reading of the materials from that period, I don't believe that these rumors were true, but they were out there. And that even speaks more to it, right?
Well, yeah,
if there's any
they
chance
want
this is
to
true.
verify that.
Right.
Get straight.
Yeah.
So
They were just asking her to clarify.
exactly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Okay.
You're going to show us where to find these documents.
Yes. Oh, 2 things. And then I'm going to tell you a really quick story about archives and why they're so freaking cool. So the members of Hui Lahaina that are in the men's group that are in that one photograph that we have, the 13 men, I've been trying to research them for a long time. Do we have photographs of them? So we have photographs of about 4 of them. B.P. Kane, J.W. B.P. Kane is one of them. So I've looked at photographs, and we have glass plate negatives in the state archives, which are literally glass, and the image is etched into the glass, so it doesn't degrade. So today we make images from it, and they look crystal clear. They're absolutely beautiful. And so I looked at, we have a card catalog index, and so I looked through all the things, there's no B.P. He's not in there. And so I looked at him last year, he's not in there. So just the other day, somebody asked me about B.P. Kane, and I'm like, no. I said, no, there's no photograph. I'm like, well, I want to triple check, because it's just insane. So back to the card catalog, I looked, and there's not a B.P. Kane, but there's a Mrs. B.P. Kane. Mrs. J.W. B.P. Kane. I'm like, I'll see what she looks like, she's his wife. And I went upstairs, and it's actually him. Somebody mistyped the card, Mrs. instead of Mr., and it's him. So, I never would have found it, right? And here's this. So for me, that when mail like that happens is because this was the time he chose to come out, right? He found it. And I'll show you his picture. It's absolutely stunning. This is him. So he's one of the leaders of Hui Lahaina. So he was the vice president of Hui Lahaina, J.W. B.P. Kane, right? And we have this as a glass negative that I scanned, or paid to scan yesterday, which will produce us a 1200 dpi photograph, which means we can make 7-foot posters that look crystal clear from that negative. So that's the type, this is how his story gets around. So let me show you the website. Should probably be let off. 1 second. And this is also the digital unit at State Archives. Credit to them. I mean, this is folks rushing for 2 weeks, doing about 6 hours a day to get this stuff up. Oop, couldn't know what to have. If I use my phone for hotspot. We have no internet here.
When did Loyola form?
March 1893. Yeah, the men started at the beginning of the month, the women started later than the 27th of the month. And it was literally across the street. So where the post office is, the active part of the post office, it's the Diamond Head side, the Alii side, in the back. Was a hall called Arian Hall, and that's where they formed. Okay. There it is. Okay. So if you go to what State Archives, this is not it. Okay, if you go to, let me go to the home page so you can see that. So this is actually put on as a special, we have a special collection, so you should see it right on the home page. This, by the way, this is, up here we have probates, we have passenger manifests, we have vital statistics records, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so here's our main page. And you'll see there records of the 1894 Constitution Convention now online. And it's literally 7,000 pages of material right there. Second draft of the Constitution, first draft of the Constitution, sample election, petitions of women's suffrage, petitions for Chinese rights. Yeah, it's all right there. Petition for Chinese rights. Oh, he took a picture. It's like a 12-foot petition. There's a record of proceedings, every word that was said during the 23 days of the convention. Yeah, it's all there online for you. So that's what, that type of thing is the stuff that he's really passionate about, and I'm appreciative of. The public record, the government records is what our priority is by law. But we also have manuscript collections, private collections, but we can't put them at the head of the line because that's not our kuleana is, by state law, it is the government records. So we have to go out and find partners. And we recently did, the Queen's Trust gave us a chunk of money to digitize the Queen's collection. And so that's done, and it will be up probably in the next 30 days. So everything that we have from the Queen Elizabeth, including those documents for her safe, letters she wrote, all that stuff will be online soon. It's all happening. And the Queen's Trust can afford it. Did you see the paper? Yeah. They just sold land for like $250 million. Okay. So thank you guys for taking time to come out and see this.
Thank you.
It's I know it's a lot of information. The thing I forgot to mention, I handed you, is another kind of interesting find. And I did this because this is them taking action to cause that, right? This is 2 days after the Proclamation of the Republic. Hawaiians saying, it's ridiculous. Look at their words. We represent the greater majority of the legitimate voters of this country, do hereby most solemnly protest against the promulgation of the new Constitution, formed without the consent and participation of the people. And we also protest against changing the form of government from the one under which we had lived peacefully and prosperously for many years, and that we maintain that the will of the majority of the legitimate voters of Hawaii should be the supreme power of the land, as such power is so recognized and accepted in all civilized countries and by all the enlightened governments of the world. What an argument. Like, all the civilized countries of the world say we should have a government of the people, so what the hell is going on? And the other reason this is kind of really cool is so I'm working on a book of Huila. We've been looking for stuff for a long time. Very few stuff exists from them. They weren't a government organization, so it's probably in Auntie's attics and things like that. But what we have is very little. What I had known to this point was that Huila published a lot of stuff in the newspapers. We see their petitions, we see their announcements, we see their proclamations in the newspapers. But I'd never seen a physical document of it until just last week. I found this. This is a resolution printed as a broadside. So broadsides were of different size. This one is about that size, maybe a little larger. And they were literally stuck on the side of buildings. They were glued, put on the courthouse, put on the post office, put on the fire department, and so forth. And so people could walk around and get the news. And this is the first one, the only one I've ever seen from Bill Alii. So we have that at the state archives also. The pitch that I'll say to you to keep researching is that that photograph came up because I refused to give up thinking it was Mrs. and it was Mr. This was, and this is where archival theory butts up against researchers. They have a way that they do things. That sometimes doesn't make sense to researchers, but it's the way they do things. And they have to. This was in a folder that is FONEX broadsides, miscellaneous, undated. Which I never looked there for the 1894 broadside from Bill Alii. But because there wasn't literally you know it is because it says, but because there's not literally a date out there, it doesn't go into the 1894 folder. So when you go into 1894 and look for stuff, you're never going to find this. You're going to find it in that miscellaneous undated folder. So when you looking for something, you can't find it, keep digging.